Hello, the road to Malta's independence. This video attempts to explain the road to Malta's independence and goes through various scenarios of what might have happened had the circumstances been different. So in a way, it is a what-if scenario. The first thing we need to know is that there are over 191 islands in the Mediterranean Sea. And we have some quite big ones: Sardinia, Corsica, Sicilia, and many small ones. Now, interestingly enough, we find out that all these islands belong to some other land-based nations, and these are France, Italy, Spain, Croatia, Greece, Albania, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Montenegro, and Tunisia. So, for example, Sicily belongs to Italy, Sardinia to France, and so on. Now, interestingly enough, the surprise is that although all these 191 islands belong to land-based countries, there are two of them which do not. And for some reason, these two have managed to become independent. One of them is the island of Cyprus, which is partially independent, as the other part of it is disputed territory. So the only island which is 100% independent is the island of Malta. Now, in this video, the question comes up. So we need to ask, how come when over 190 islands, it was only Malta and partially Cyprus that managed to become independent, when all the other islands have not? To answer this question, we need to go back to the 15th century. And what we'll find out that up to the 15th century, Malta had more or less always belonged to one of the current powers, be it the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans, the Spanish, the Sicilians, etc., etc. Then, by true fate and destiny, in 1530, Malta was handed over to the Knights of St. John, who, although under the authority of the Pope, had a good amount of autonomy. In a way, as fate would have it, being part of this semi-autonomous organization played an important part of our later becoming an independent nation. And so the first thing we need to know, who were the knights? The Knights of Malta were in Malta from 1530 to 1798. The official name is the Sovereign Military Hospitalier Order of St. John, of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta, shortly known the Knight Hospitaliers. Now, who were the knights? The knights, in a way, they were a sort of European military alliance against the rise of the Muslim conquest of the Holy Lands. They acted as a sort of NATO troops. Each country or language had their group and headquarters, many of them still existing all over Valletta and Burgos. Nowadays we call them the Auberge de Castile, Auberge d'Italie, and so on. They were then ruled by one particular Grand Master. So although Malta was not free, being ruled by an international organization, it kept other regional powers from taking Malta. This indirectly played a strong role in Malta's later special position within the British Empire and its later independence. Now we are going to go through three different scenarios of how Malta's future could have developed. So the first scenario is, let's say the French never came to Malta and Malta had stayed under the Knights. The second scenario, the French came to Malta and Malta was never freed or occupied by the British. It means the French stayed here. The third scenario is the actual real scenario. The French threw the Knights out and later the British threw the French out. So we'll start. And first we're going to start clearly with scenario number one. What if the Knights had stayed in Malta? And so let's for a moment assume that Napoleon never came to Malta and the Knights would have remained as the government of Malta. Although Malta would have been independent, we would have been ruled by the ruling Grand Master, who would have been the most probably some French, German, or Italian Grand Master. Malta would have established itself as a sort of independent nation, but run by the Knights of St. John. So in a way independent from other countries, but run by a non-Maltese organization. Now, let's say this would have worked for sure, let's say till World War II. Why? Because we have to keep in mind that the majority of the Knights, by that time Britain had been out of the system, had come from modern-day France, Germany, and Italy. Now remember, these were in the war all under the occupation of Hitler. So we can assume that under pressure from either Italy occupied France or Hitler's Germany, the Grand Masters would have been forced to hand over Malta to the Nazi occupation. Malta would have become part of the Third Reich. And in the next map you can see, here you can see the red marked countries or districts where the country is occupied by the Third Reich. And Malta in the middle, there's no way they would have let it become independent. So, after losing the war, as part of Germany, would have either become administered by the four Allied powers, USA, Britain, France, and Russia. This was the same as was done in Germany, where Germany was divided into four, and Berlin was also divided into four. That means, with a bit of bad luck, we could have ended being part of the Iron Curtain, and now still part of Russia. Now we go to scenario number 2. Here we are saying the French take over Malta, and Malta was never freed of them by the British. It means we are still under the French. Now, I would say Malta would nowadays be still a small French-speaking island belonging to France. Why? Because we would have a certain local administration, but we are part of France. Because when we look at the French islands, they are not free. So if Corsica never managed to gain independence, neither would we. We would be clearly still be part of France, still part of the EU, and also part of NATO. Of course, assuming again that once we were under France, that in the Second World War, we were not also taken again by the Germans, and then we come to the same scenario that after the war, Malta would be again have been divided by the four winning powers. That means USA, UK, France, and of course Russia. Now, assuming that for sure Russia would not have missed the chance to have a Maltese harbor in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. So let's assume that the UK, USA, France alliance would have taken over Valletta. So most probably Russia would have taken over the south, maybe the Marsa-Shlock-Birzabuja harbor. Or, in an easier way to administer, they would say have taken over Gozo. And then we can imagine if this would have happened, how the situation would have changed. The Russians would never have let go of Malta, as this would have been their golden chance to establish a harbor in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It would have given them full rights to the 12 nautical mile exclusive zone and up to 200 mile economical zone. Here on the map you can see, imagine, these waters would belong to Russia, officially and legally, if part of Malta belonged to them. Now for Russia, for sure, this would not have missed this chance, 100%. This means we could now have a Cyprus situation where 3/4 of Malta might be independent and 1/4 would belong to Russia. Can you imagine Putin giving Malta up? No, because having a piece of land in the Mediterranean Sea gives you exclusive and legal rights to fishing, drilling, oil and gas, and of course the right to establish a military harbor in the base. This is the same as Britain has in Gibraltar and Ceuta, which belongs to Spain and is based alongside Morocco. Yes, it's hard to imagine a divided Malta, but if one can divide Cyprus and Berlin, why not Malta? Keep in mind, they could just have taken Gozo, as we discussed before, which would be easier to administer. And one thing we know, what the Russians take, they keep. Now we go to scenario number 3. This is the actual situation. The British took over Napoleon's occupation of Malta. Through the fact that Malta was not conquered but had invaded the British, we always enjoyed a special relationship with Britain. We must not forget that although not independent, Malta has had under the British various forms of self-government. In fact, what many people don't know, Malta is in a way one of the first democracies in Europe because we enjoyed various forms of self-government under the British as early as 1921. Here you see a picture of the member of the Maltese Senate in 1921. They were elected and they are making their way to the palace. So now we see, for example, although not independent, Malta has had under the British, like we said already, various forms of self-government. Under the British, we were not 100% free, but we enjoyed many forms of government. And in fact, what many people forget, that in 1958, Don Mintoff, the leader of the Labour Party, he wanted to integrate Malta 100% with the British Empire. And when we think about it, this itself shows that things were not as bad as people try to make it today. Because why would a leader of a party want to unite with a country if it was that bad? And actually, they had made a referendum about this. And the referendum, here's the film.
The year is 1956. And following a vote in favour of full integration with the UK, the Maltese Prime Minister at the time, Don Mintoff, made this statement from 10 Downing Street, explaining the Maltese vote to the British population.
The people of Malta have voted at the last general election, barely 4 months ago, for union with Britain. Such a union would guarantee their progress to the British standard of living, education and social services. In return, they offer you, the people of Britain, a base as your own in the Mediterranean.
When after the referendum in 1958, where only 59% of the people went to vote, and from those 59%, 77% of them voted to join the UK. For some reason, the UK did not accept that we joined them, and then Malta turned 360 degrees. Then we asked for independence. And here it's important to note, there was not a fight for independence. We simply asked, and in fact, as you see, 58 was the referendum, and just 5 years, more or less 4 years later, 6 years later, Malta was granted independence. And in fact, we always speak of granted, because it was given to us. We did not have had to fight. Here you see, for example, the Prime Minister of those times, in those days, Dr. Borge-Olivier, he's showing the signed document of independence document, and behind him you can see the British governor and all the high authorities. That means Malta gained independence in a peaceful manner. It was agreed to and done. What we also forget to notice is, like I said, we did not have to fight or rise against them. Independence was granted in a peaceful manner. We even got a £50 million grant paid in a period of 10 years. And apart from this, what often people forget is that from that point on, the British started to pay to keep their military in Malta, because it was not their property anymore, and they started to pay rent. And in fact, in the end, in the last years, it was handed out to be £20 million per year. 40 million were paid from Britain and 7 million were paid from NATO to keep their military bases here. This is a very important fact. If you are occupying a country, you're not paying. They were not occupying. They were simply renting the bases. Then, when we agreed with them and when we asked them to leave, they left as agreed on the 31st of March 1979. They left as friends under full military honors. Malta and the Maltese waved them off with full dignity. Here, this monument is very important. Please, when you go to Vittoriosa, take a closer look at this. And what you are seeing here is the ceremony, more or less, of when the British left. On this side, you see the Maltese. He is lowering the putting up the Maltese flag. Next to him is the soldier sounding the last horn. And on the left side, you see a British sailor and the Maltese. They are shaking hands, and he's giving him the flag. So it was not. Sometimes you hear the thing, we threw the British out. No, we did not throw the British out. It was an agreement. They had a contract. The contract finished, and they left. And they left with full military honors. And in fact, at the bottom photo, you see the then president of Malta, Dr. Tabone, and he with his wife and thousands of us Maltese. I remember I was there as a young person there personally. We waved the British off, and we waved to them till we couldn't see them anymore. They left in peace, and they left with full honor. So when you think about all these things, and from the fact that Malta gained independence, it can be greatly attributed to the fact that the British were here, because of what I explained. Now, the fact that the only other island in the Mediterranean which gained independence was Cyprus, which, either by coincidence or for the same history, was also under British, further proves the point. Thank you. That was a short analysis by Victor Cicluna. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your attention. Bye bye.